Alofa lava everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar with the Education Hub. I am really delighted to be introducing this webinar tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Just before we start though, I want to say that if you haven't already done so, please do log on to the Education Hub's website and have a look at our online library of, it's full of free resources for teachers. What we're aiming to do is to try and make the research out there accessible in a practical way for you guys to be drawing on in your everyday teaching and learning with children. So yeah, please do have a look. Tonight's webinar is going to run for about 50 minutes. Partway through, I will be opening up the chat function for you to type in your own questions to our panelists tonight. So to do that, you need to just click on the little button that says chat, and you should find that on the top or the bottom of your screen, and then you should be able to type. I do recommend that you select that your messages go to everyone, and then everyone gets to read your questions as well as myself. We're also going to be recording tonight's webinar, and that recording will be available on the website in a couple of days or so. So if you have colleagues that miss out tonight, then please do let them know that they can check out the video in a couple of days' time. Okay, wonderful. So tonight we are focusing on some research that's come from a 2-year teaching and learning research initiative project. It's called Pepe meamea in the Spirit of the Collective, and it's all about embedding Samoan Indigenous philosophies into early childhood education for Samoan children, particularly infants and toddlers. And our panel tonight, who I'm about to introduce, they will just be discussing the findings from the first year of that study. So we look forward to hearing about that. So I'd just like to say a warm welcome to our panelists, Manuia Leafiafi, and let me start with some introductions. Dr. Sala, I'm going to do my best with my Samoan pronunciation tonight. Dr. Sala Faasaulala Tagoilelagi-Leota. Sala hails from the villages of Vatia in American Samoa, Waiala, Sapunoa, and Alofa. She has had more than 30 years experience in Samoan ECE, including leadership in initial teacher education and teachers' professional development. And she's also been the director and chair of the Society Alga Amata Samoa, Aotearoa Incorporated, which is an association focused on supporting Samoan early childhood centres and resources and professional development for teachers. And she served in that role for 12 years. Sala currently works for the Ministry of Pacific Peoples as the Principal Analyst in Research and Evaluation. So thank you for joining us tonight, Sala.
Dr. Vicky.
Dr Tafili Utumapu-McBride was born in Samoa with ancestral ties to Safotu and Levi and Samoa. She has 30 years of experience lecturing and specialising in Pacific pedagogies, and she's currently a senior lecturer and programme leader of the initial teacher education, the Bachelors of Education at AUT University. Alofa Tafili.
Alofa Vicky.
And finally, Dr. Jacoba Matapo has Samoan Dutch heritage. She has ancestral ties to Seumu and Saanga in Samoa. She specialises in Pacifica ECE, and she's the current Associate Dean of Pacifica at the Faculty of Education and Social Work at the University of Auckland. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome, Jacoba. And we'd like to, before we start with our questions, we'd like to start with a tatalo, and I think Sala is going to lead that for us tonight.
So I fo matatalo le atua, whaftailo mātou tamā mo le mea fiafi mātango fie, wala awa tu la ua fionga mo le musuina o mātou loto manganga ina ia maua se talanoa se whaasoa e ami o tonu i lumo la ua fio. Nei mea oma le atua mātou whaasoa ele na o mātou talanoa e whai mātou masui o whai a onga o lo i e te tonu o le nei porkalame. Mātou wala awa tu e whaamanuia mai nei a fiafi a mātou uma i lo swafa Yesu. Amene.
Thank you, Sala. Okay, well, we're really looking forward to hearing about the project that the three of you have been working on together. Can I start by asking why an Indigenous framework for Samoan infant and toddler pedagogy is actually needed?
Alofa lava, Vicky, thank you for that opening question. You know, why is an Indigenous framework for Samoan infant and toddler pedagogy needed? First of all, I just want to give a little bit of background as to understand the New Zealand Samoan context for which this research is grounded, but also understanding in a sense the sort of demographic makeup of Samoans who are indeed living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So the highest proportion of Pacific peoples in New Zealand is actually Samoan, and that sits at 48.7% of the entire Pacific population being Samoan. And also understanding too that Samoan population in New Zealand is the highest actually in the world. Transnational population is the highest in the world, other than of course the Samoan population. So that speaks a lot in terms of understanding the sort of Samoan demographic makeup. And the other important factor here is to understand that the majority of Samoan living in Aotearoa, New Zealand now are actually New Zealand born Samoan. And this is particularly significant to early childhood education. So we have more of our young New Zealand born Samoan enrolling into early childhood education. So that just sort of gives us a little bit of a background in understanding the Samoan context of the population in New Zealand. But I think there's much more to it than that. I think from an Indigenous framework of Samoan infant and toddler pedagogy, we can present Samoan ways of being, Samoan knowledge systems, as well as the practice that is needed in terms of supporting the Samoan well-being of our infants and toddlers. And all of these things are sort of evolving as all of us are engaged in the research project this year. So it's been really exciting. I'm going to hand that question over to Sala and Tafili if there's anything else you'd like to contribute to that question.
I would, I suppose Samoan ECE is the tuakana of Pacific ECE. If we get it right, then maybe we are paving the way for Pacific ECE. If we get it wrong, at least our other sisters will change the pathway and do a better job than us. In that stance, being here over 30 years, you know, as Jacoba has mentioned the population, it's a cultural right of every child in New Zealand to access something that does embrace who they are, how they breathe, how they operate every day. And the framework is something that we hope it does justice to the living of Samoan children here in New Zealand. We want to make sure that a framework captures all the ngangana, the anganu'u, the children's cultural identities that we believe research has says it leads to academic achievement. Now, how can our children be immersed in our onga amata, for instance, and using the frames of the Western world? Is there justice there? How can their cultural imprints be captured? Also, I feel that it calls for, New Zealand's not new to diversity. It calls for bigger things for training, you know, in the ITE that this is just it's not something new. Pacific has been here for 30 years. We have been breathing a lot of Western philosophies. It's our turn now, I suppose. And as we become more diverse, that we want to do justice to our children's living here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Thank you. Tafili?
Yeah, as Sala was saying, it also enhances our children's sense of belonging, to actually have things that they can connect to. And it really comes out, you know, as Sala was saying, Western knowledge is everywhere. You know, it's in our schools right from, you know, ECE onwards. And there's very little opportunity for Indigenous. So Pepe meamea is the Samoan perspective. And that is something that we want, yeah, it's important that it's there, and maybe gives the other groups an opportunity to bring their own.
And so, children are carriers of our culture, you know, blood. We've been refuted that blood DNA is not cultural. And you know, here in New Zealand, that shouldn't be argued. Okay, if we can defend it, you know, internationally, but you know, the fact that people ask us, your DNA is not cultural, it's scientific. What is that saying about how we live here? You know, we existed before science, and we had science in our own epistemology. So how can we say that that we're forever going to try and defend who we are to the mainstream and to the Western, and even to New Zealand, I suppose. So, you know, the framing is probably one of many that our Pacific ECE will build, our other sisters will build for their own children, because we are lumped in one as Pacific, but everyone is unique, and that's the exciting part, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you. So how do you see, or how is the Samoan Pepe meamea, the Samoan infant or toddler, different from conventional notions of or the Western notion of the infant and toddler?
I'll start that one. My colleagues will support me and add on. In every aspect of the title of the research, the collective, Pepe meamea is platforming off a very collective spirit, in the sense that the children, we're talking about children, not the child. So a lot of the documentations within New Zealand kind of refers to the child as singular, but we cannot do that in a Samoan lens or Pacific lens, that children do not learn in isolation from their parents, from their communities, from their churches, from their villages, from their extended families. It takes a village to raise a child. We wanted to make sure that Pepe meamea, what is, you know, unpack Pepe meamea. What does Pepe mean? Is it from the word baby, or is it from the word butterfly? Because Pepe also means butterfly. And what is meamea? We really wanted to get to the depth of the word meamea, as in very soft, very tender, like a shoot, very vulnerable. Pepe meamea, vulnerable to who and why? So we wanted to really unpack the concept of Pepe meamea to show that we perform, and our, what's the word? The way our cultural values are enacted is very different. There's a lot of writings from the Western literature about how you're supposed to engage with infants and toddlers. We're not refuting that. They all contribute to our children also, but there are ways that we execute them differently. You know, simple words like Alofa. How do you show love? How do you show love? It's not by, some people say it's presence, your presence, but for us, it's a presence from face to face. It's not a presence where you're facing your back or you're talking from a distance. So those kind of simple things that we wanted to say, hang on, we do actually say and perform quite differently, because our knowledges are tapu knowledge, and because they're tapu, they're legitimate knowledge. And when it's legitimate, it means you adhere to the tapu of each child from where they come. You acknowledge where they've come from. So that's how wide and how deep the framework wants to stretch, with the teacher's support that we're engaging with.
Thank you. Thank you, Sala, for talking about the sort of configurations that we have been in conversation with our Samoan whaiaonga. I just want to reiterate as well that although the three of us are here, we do represent a collective of 6 aonga amata from South Auckland, experienced teachers, 30 plus years teaching in full immersion Samoan ECE, even down to new emerging teachers who are brand new to the sector. So we acknowledge too the knowledge that they bring into conversation with us at this time. I just want to come back to this notion of infant and toddler, because Tafili and Sala, myself, and even the teachers have sort of grappled with this demarcation between an infant and a toddler. What is assumed when we present the image of Pepe meamea framed within a developmentalist really approach. And so this is another reason why, as we talk and think through Pepe meamea, we feel that it is needed because the sort of linear definitions of development, there are tensions from a Samoan point of view. Particularly thinking about the ways in which Pepe meamea enter into the world, right from conception, through to birth and through to the first few days of life, and then of course ongoing. The child is always part of the collective, the configurations of genealogy, particular specific connections to village, to nu'u, as well as ancestors, and all part of that makes the Pepe meamea. So I just wanted to add to that. And another important component of that is this word tofi that we've talked about a lot, and that's about inheritance. So we see this is continuing to evolve currently through the research and through further talanoa with our teachers. But we see here that Pepe meamea is already well connected even before birth. So these are some of the ancestral ties or the genealogy, the tofi, the inheritance that need to be taken seriously when we think about Samoan Pepe meamea belonging, well-being and identity. So these are things that we have identified so far with our whaiaonga.
Tafili, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, as Sala was saying, it's really that nesting and a strong foundation in language and culture. And to, once upon a time we had to leave our culture at the gate. So our children, our children are raised in the richness of that. And, it's sort of like, in order to teach our children, you need to know them. And having that strong sense of understanding of Pepe meamea, that's the richness, that is the Alofa, that's the gift, in relation, to our teachers, irrespective of, their background. That is the richness of the framework.
I mean, one of the things that we're trying to explore, Vicky, is if you see behind me the Fala Pepe that we're trying to coin as Fala Amata. It's the first mat. That's how big it is. It's a dying art for Samoa, and I am almost sure that even in other Pacific nations they have a similar mat for the purpose of the infant. So the mat travels with the infant wherever the parents go. It's taken it's almost like a therapeutic mat for the child. So we're exploring that also as a pedagogy. What are the things that we're trying to also revive or resuscitate some of our dying art for Samoa that's in particular pertains to Pepe meamea.
Thank you. And that's really interesting how you're drawing on all these Indigenous practice and culture, and in what ways have you drawn on Indigenous knowledge systems? You've talked a little bit about this, but how are you drawing on your Indigenous knowledge system to reconceptualize infant and toddler care from that Samoan perspective.
I'd like to mention, would you like to go, Tafili? Because Tafili's always getting the last one. Would you like to go, or?
Oh no, you start, Sala.
Okay, thank you. Would like to acknowledge our 6 centres, our Samoan 6 centres. That's Se Ngā Ngongoa o ngā amata, Fotu Malama o ngā amata, Fitu Taiala o ngā amata, Fitu Aulelea o ngā amata, Tu Manuele Tu Longolongoa o ngā amata, and Tai Ao Fou, all located in the south of Auckland. These centres, you know, the usage of the word a o ngā amata is again, what is it? It's already taking ownership of who they are. They haven't called themselves anything else but a o ngā amata, which is why maybe perhaps the fala behind me, the fit, is fala amata for what we're trying to innovate. So not only the 6 centres, but I suppose collectively all the teachers put together would come with probably over 60 years of experience if we need to put it together. So I don't think we can say Pacific ECE is the baby of the sector. We have grown a bit, but in a struggling way as we find our way through ITE. We've lost our ITE, you know, our Pacific ECE trainees. We're trying to find our way through there, because what's the point of having all this when we cannot have a trainee that places this into practice? We also have an advisory that some of the advisory board are here. We don't want to travel on ourselves. We like to call upon our tangata whenua friends, colleagues who also feed into the work, because it's in the context of Aotearoa New Zealand that we're trying to frame Pepe meamea. So put all together, Samoan ECE started in the late 1980s. So that's over 30 years. We've got a text that the SAASIA as an organization produced. We've got other publications. We have a lot of, not a lot, many of our ECE academics are Samoan. So we have that background. And I know there's growing numbers from our other Pacific nations coming up with our Tongans. Jean is coming up. So, you know, there's also our other Samoan academics who are not here in ECE, but that's how we've drawn on this. We've been here, we've briefed the Western air. We've journeyed through the waves and the winds of the Western discourse, and we think that it's our turn, it's our time. It's our time that we do this. Yeah.
Tafili, would you like to comment?
Yeah, as Sala was saying, it's sort of like, you know, the pioneers, you know, who established the Aonga Amata. They've sort of like, they've looked at, you know, for example, for the kohanga, they saw what was happening to Māori, and they didn't want that to happen to our children. And it was just holding on to, you know, the sense of belonging, especially growing up in a country which is not ours, and the importance of cultural identity, because, you know, that has implications for lots of things. And because we've been here for, you know, generations, you know, some are 3 generations, some are more than that. So it is just holding on to, you know, holding on to the cultural identity and being proud, irrespective of whether you're fluent or partially fluent, but having that sense of pride. So yeah, it's it is honouring the pioneers, you know, who enabled us, and those strong women's groups as well. You know, the ministers' wives, you know, in terms of the work that they've done over the years. It's, you know, it's always come down to women. It is that the strong pull to, I call it, you you know, the backbones of our family. The women are the backbones of the church as well. You know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those pioneers.
And Jacoba, anything that you would like to add about drawing on those Indigenous knowledge systems, that rich culture?
So we do have leading Samoan scholars that we draw from. We have reference to their work, Tuia Tamasese, who is a Samoan knowledge custodian, the former head of state of Samoa. And then there's also a Samoan critical analysis framework that's been developed by Akata is her name. And so we've utilised that throughout the research approach. But I think alongside engaging Samoan Indigenous scholarship is actually the way that we think collectively in terms of a relationship to knowledge. And this is something that Sala mentioned earlier on about the tapu. So in the research process, it's also understanding that there are sometimes shared within the talanoanga, within the context of the talanoa, the emerging and evolving conversation. Sometimes there are particular knowledge systems that are talked about and shared, but not necessarily intended for the wider audience. And that's about respecting the sacredness of knowledge systems. So this is something that I believe is at the heart of this research. It's about engaging in a way that respects and honors the tapu of particular knowledge systems. At times, I've shared, Sala has shared, Tafili shared, our teachers have shared particular knowledge systems that are actually from their own ancestry or particular to a village. You know, and we've talked about the sort of interplay of the nuances from village to village. And these are important because it helps us to frame and create rigor in the way that we engage with these particular Samoan concepts, but also keeping in mind there is a specific relationship to those knowledge systems. And honouring that within the research space. So that's something that's really important to mobilising these Indigenous knowledge systems. Sala's also mentioned earlier on today in a conversation, actually, and Tafili too, this idea around data sovereignty. You know, that's a really important point that's come up for many Indigenous researchers, you know, is actually, you know, who owns the data and what gets done with it and what, you know, what is its reach? Where does it go? These are all important parts of thinking about Indigenous systems in research. And so I think, you know, it's also keeping that in mind in terms of, you know, the collective in the way that we enter research. Yeah.
Thank you. Lots of questions coming through about, you know, how teachers can use this research. Really interested in what you're doing, but how will this research that you're doing support Samoan or even non-Samoan teachers to engage in pedagogy that's really culturally sustaining for our Samoan children, in especially perhaps a mainstream ECE? Who would like to take that question?
Okay. I'm having a break.
I don't mind taking it. Actually, that's a really exciting question, because we realise collectively, not only our Samoan Aonga Mata, but also as a research collective, that actually the majority of Samoan Pepe meamea are enrolled in mainstream ECE. What are the implications for those children who might not have access to the language, to the culture? It's also important to note that actually 44% of New Zealand Samoans can speak Samoan. So what does that mean for the rest that do not speak Samoan? You know, these are very real tensions that we are mindful of. And so for this first phase of the research project, it really is about co-designing, co-developing the framework with our expert Samoan Aonga Mata teachers. And then next year, what we are doing is inviting our mainstream ECE partners to engage in a mentoring tuakana relationship with our onga amata experts. And this is where we hope we will be able to, support the implementation of Pepe meamea right across the early childhood sector. While there will be nuances and there will be particular aspects of Pepe meamea that are for our onga amata, there will also be other, aspects that can be utilised also within mainstream. So it's our hope and our vision that this framework will be something that can support all Samoan Pepe meamea in New Zealand. Yeah.
Thank you, Jacoba. We're really pleased to hear that. Would you like to add anything, Tafili?
Yeah, as I was saying to before, it doesn't matter who you are. It just adds to your, I call it with our AUT students, it is about resourcing your kete of knowledge. And it may not be your language, it may not be your culture, but it will help you be a better teacher. And it endorses tapasa, the three turu, about it enriches your pedagogy, and it also allows you to have that engagement with the parents, the caregivers, the community where the children come from. So yeah, so it is definitely going to lift your practice. And I see that with my own students. They may not be Samoan or Tongan, but I just see how they just run with concepts that are different because they have got nothing to lose. and even with something like Talanoa, they learn it. And they just, it just becomes part of their practice. So Pepe meamea will also enrich their practice as well. It'll give them a wonderful conversation piece with the parents, with the caregivers. So yeah, it's as far as I'm concerned, because we're biased, the three of us. Can
I just add quickly to what Tafili has mentioned? So what is framed through Pepe meamea and how can it benefit even our mainstream early childhood teachers who are engaging with Samoan Pepe meamea? It might offer an opportunity to think differently about pedagogy in the centre. For example, practices that are often taken on board and can at times become, taken for granted. And it might support teachers to think differently around notions of primary caregiving, for example, or to think differently about attachment theory, for example, or the image of the child. So Pepe meamea is also a conceptual framework. It helps to think Samoan philosophy and pedagogy with our Samoan Pepe meamea. So I'm really hoping that it acts as a provocation for teachers to open themselves up to Samoan knowledge systems and frameworks for Pepe meamea.
And I think you're right, that enriches, having a variety of perspectives, as Tafili, you were saying, is that enriches that kite that teachers carry with them and the things that we're able to do with the more tools that we have at our disposal. So thank you very much. Teachers are also wondering about tapasa, and thank you, Tafili, you mentioned tapasa. How does the work that you're doing connect into tapasa? How will this conceptualisation of Pepe meamea really fit with tapasa? Sala, would you like to take this question?
I love how Sala's passing it.
Pass it out.
I don't mind speaking to this one quickly. Actually, this was something that we really dug deep into when we put our proposal together for this TLRI research. So currently, tapasa only provides one example of infant and toddler pedagogy, and it's not actually specific to either, Samoan, Tongan, Niuean. It's not ethnic specific. So we saw that there's a lot of room for movement, but also a lot of room for improvement within tapasa. And so looking at tapasa in a sense, that from a Samoan perspective, we're able to go deep into the Samoan epistemologies, we're able to go deep into the Samoan philosophy. We believe that this framework will enhance tapasa and possibly provide other opportunities for teachers of Pepe meamea to make multiple and various connections right across tapasa. But what's available currently is quite limited in the space of Samoan infant and toddler or Pepe meamea pedagogy.
Yeah, and in adding on to that, tapasa is what's the word? It's a Samoan word. I think it's also a Pan-Pacific framework. Where you get called, it's a Samoan title, then you have Turu, which is Cook Island, and then the rest is all in English. The Samoan ECE Association has actually prepared tapasa using the Samoan concepts. We have conceptualized what those competencies might mean. So in taking it, the words are used. We can only get to the depth if we name it. If we keep naming it in English, we will not get the depth of it. So when you look at the words like competencies, what does competency mean in Samoan? So we have also pulled from that source to try and support the work for Pepe meamea and what is relationship, to the depth of relationship. What does it mean? And also how are they enacted in the center? So there's a lot that our framework will contribute to a worldview, or a Samoan worldview of tapasa and a Tongan worldview of tapasa, ethnic specific, pulling at each specific ECE word basket so that they can ground the essence of our being, why we breathe differently from everyone. So yeah, tapasa, and tapasa has a lot to offer to us, but when you look at things, words like fofo as a pedagogy, fofo is massage for babies. Well, how is that, and why do we do it, and how is it done? Those are the things that we're trying to revive in the framing of this framework. So yes, we like tapasa. It's a start. We will add on to it. Thank you.
I know we have planned one more question, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to leave that one just to the end of our webinar and just spend maybe the next sort of 5 minutes looking at some of the questions that have been coming in from teachers. First of all, is this a philosophy that could aspects of the Pepe meamea philosophy and framework be used with other tamariki? What's your feelings on that?
Is it other, as in other Pacific?
Sorry, yes, tamariki, Māori tamariki, or Pakeha tamariki.
Well, with the trainings that we've had in ITE for Pacific, training the teachers, we've had all sorts of students. They weren't just Pacific in these trainings. We would have Cambodian students, Vietnamese students, but we teach the Pacific concepts to drive the paper. So at the end of the paper, they will not only know a Tongan, a Samoan, a Cook Island perspective of the paper, but they will also ground their own as Cambodians, so that they are able to empower children, whatever child is put in front of them. So they become quite flexible. They're thinking of their feet. They know, I know the Samoan children act this way. So I've got Samoans here, I've got Tongans here, but I also know I'm Cambodian. So it is applicable, providing like using the process that tapasa uses, is that you ground yourself first. Now, what is Pepe meamea from a Maori perspective? What is Pepe meamea from a Tongan or Cook Island or Niuean? And then we're enhancing whatever is there. They might come up with something totally different. So of course it is. It will support anyone that has a cultural background, which is everyone.
Yeah. I guess the question was, is this only for Samoan, Pepe meamea? But yeah, I like your answer. Learning about each other, another culture, helps you learn about your own, for sure.
I mean, doing this work with the Fala Pepe, we came to learn about the wahakura. Is it wahakura for Māori? What are the elements of why those flags were used? Why is this flags used? You know, there is scientific value there, that it's good for children. What is it, to rest on this type of flag? So is it the same with the wahakura? So that interchange, being able to transmit one cultural knowledge to another at the same time, not losing the tapu of that knowledge. So of course it's transferable.
Thank you. Another question is about, well, one thing I want to just clarify for everyone is that Pepe meamea is a framework. It's not a book. It's a framework, and it's very much in the making. So it's something you will hear more about as the work goes on. And there are questions asking about when it's going to be published. Could you talk a little bit about how the project's going to continue, and what you sort of see the eventual output of this research being?
It's a really good question. It's something that we're currently co-designing with our whaeaonga. So all of the teachers that are involved in this research project, we really do want to see some tangible outcomes from this research project, being accessible resources for all teachers, resources that support our full immersion aonga amata, but also resources that support our mainstream, English speaking early childhood education context. So in terms of publications, it's something that we're currently working on. We have our first publication in the making at the moment. So we're really excited. We're hoping that by early next year that will be published. But at the moment, it's still in the process of co-design with teachers. What the final sort of framework will look like or feel like is still in the making. But we're really excited to bring this work forward alongside our teachers.
And we're also thinking of submitting abstracts for our teachers that are in this to present at conferences. Yeah.
Fabulous, that would be really good. And finally, I want to just touch on something you mentioned before, Sala, about Alofa and love. And one of the questions is, is that something that features quite strongly in your Pepe meamea framework? Questions around, just, I suppose, giving that affirmation that it's okay to love children, that sometimes that's something that professionally we have to be cautious of loving children. Interested, just, and I know that's probably a really huge topic, but just a few words so that would be wonderful.
If we go back to the greetings of each Pacific nation, for example, kia orana, kia ora, ta alofa, malo elelei, it's got nothing to do with hello. Ta alofa has a lot to do with my love. You greet someone as in my love. Ta, my, alofa, my love. So, for to question us whether we love or we show love or we love our work, that debate, it's for us, it's not a division, because the word alofa, if we unpack it, alo, this is not me unpacking, this is from a Reverend Whiatunai. I like to quote him, Whiatunai liwa ana. He unpacked the word alofa for us. Alofa, alo means your stomach. Wherever you face your stomach, the four, alofa, the front, back, and side, you're showing love. You cannot show love by turning around like this and saying to the child, oh, here, come here. But you're not facing your front. In another sense, Samoans call it tawhisi lawhai, or alomai aloatu, face to face. So how can you not show love if you're fronting children, every day of the week? because you're loving what you do. It's a calling, it's your mission. So it's very hard to separate loving the child and loving the profession, because if you don't love the child, then you don't love the profession. That's why you face the child, because you love. The minute you stop facing the child, you don't love your profession. So that's Alofa for us.
Thank you, Sala. Is there anything you'd like to add, Tafili?
I think Sala's covered that pretty well.
That was a beautiful answer. Okay, just to sadly come to some conclusions. We're so excited. The comments coming through, everyone's so excited to hear about this work. Thank you so much for sharing even just the sort of seeds that are emerging at the moment. And just to finish then, I wonder if you could offer sort of what you see as the sort of the key insights that this research is really offering the early childhood sector, indigenising both, research practice and pedagogies in early childhood centres. Yeah, what would you see as the key insights? And who would like to take that first?
I would like to raise one thing, and it's insights about teacher identity. And I find this a really interesting one because in terms of really understanding the tensions around particular policy, particular, I guess in a sense, notions of how quality is perceived in early childhood education. These things need to come into question. Even the question you raised earlier on, Vicky, around Alofa, we don't see that explicit in, teaching criteria, particularly from a collective point of view. So what does this mean for teacher identity? I think what's important that is coming out of the research currently is how, mobilizing a framework of Pepe meamea also requires teachers to call into question their own subjectivity, to call into question what are the sort of parameters around, ethical, moral practice in terms of even, I guess, the ways in which, notions come up in ECE, like around compliance, for example, and then thinking through a Samoan framework of service to community and the importance of that. Sometimes there is a blurring of particular boundaries because of the collective commitment and collective responsibility around Pepe meamea. So these are the sorts of things that are coming up quite frequently in Talanoa with teachers having to navigate and negotiate those particular spaces. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just add my piece before?
Please.
But you want to go, Tafili? Tafili, I'll go after you. You want?
Oh, I just wanted to say one thing in relation to some of our teachers from our Onga Amata, is that it is really the intergenerational, because as Jacoba was saying, some are young, and we've got the older teachers. So it is really interesting looking at how the confidence in the younger teachers is growing. It's like building them up, and also sometimes we're talking about this not very long ago. It's about giving them the confidence to own their knowledge and to be able to to further develop that. So that is something that we're hoping that we're definitely going to document and develop in that, and also the beauty of the glossary as well. So it's glossaries are important, and that's another major contribution of this research.
I'd like to add, because we're all from was at AUT a couple of moons ago. Well, AUT and Auckland University both experienced closing down of our Pacific ECE training. So I would look at for a national insight. At the end of the day, we could write, we could publish, we could create any framework out of anything really. But how is it going to be sustained and revitalized from one generation to another if we don't have a training that actually puts it into practice? So that's a national insight. We want training for Pacific ECE teachers that has been taken off because of the IELTS. I'm putting a plug in for that. For IELTS, we're talking about language as the depth of our cultural knowledge, yet the International English Language Test stops us from doing that. Also training for Pacific bilingual teachers. That's also how is this cultural knowledge going to continue along the continuum if there's no trainings for the Pacific teachers, ECE teachers, and our Pacific bilingual teachers. And to support all that is the assessment for Pacific ECE. We've been asking for an opportunity for an assessment for Pacific ECE, but we're still assessing in English. Also, we'd like to think that international insight is for this work to lead into a international journal or international Aonga Amata International as a journal for to produce journals for Aonga Amata, so some Aonga Amata teachers can write of their work and get it published. So we've already got a pool of international reps of Aonga Amata. So this work will lead into that. It will strengthen that international capacity. So we're looking far ahead and hope that what we're doing, that the government can hear that we really need our trainings. We really need our trainings for Pacific early childhood and Pacific bilingual classrooms. That's the insight at the moment. And many others that my colleagues have mentioned here.
So along those lines, Sala, I just want to drop some more stats to put it into perspective. So all Pacifica early childhood services in New Zealand only make 2.2% of the entire early childhood sector. So that just shows that we're a very small minority within a larger profession or larger sector. So this is why it's even more important that we honour and we maintain the services that we currently have.
Absolutely. Well, look, ladies, I'm sorry we've run out of time tonight. We have just been so excited and so passionate about supporting this work. It's just really wonderful to see everybody that's come on tonight with so much interest and enthusiasm for your work. We're really excited to see what comes from it. I think that for me, just the work that you're doing is just adding those new conceptualisations, new ways of thinking about the children that we're working with, enriching our children too with the things that we can offer them, the different ways of viewing the world, and being able to be immersed in lots of different cultures. I think it's just such a powerful thing for our children. So yeah, I think the work you're doing is really going to challenge our thinking and have us really reflecting on practice a lot more. So I'm very, very grateful for you for you sharing tonight. Thank you so much. And yes, as I say, we'll have to end it there. So thanks again. Manawia lepo.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,